Welcome! In this series of short videos, we will look at topics common to both the PowerBasic console and Windows compilers. Today we will look at remote execution and UDP communication. Let's assume for the moment you have created an application to give to your customers or users to run on their own computers. If this application needs to communicate with a database, server, or somewhere in the wider internet or cloud, then it will need a method to achieve this. Ideally, this functionality can be enclosed within your application with no external dependencies. However, perhaps your application needs some third-party application or software to access one or all of these facilities. This would be a dependency for your application and may need to be also installed on the same computer as your own application. Your organization may also have a firewall between your computer and one or more of these facilities. So how can we change the way we have our application configured to handle this? By removing dependencies and reducing the software needing to be installed on users' computers. One approach would be to create a server application that the local computer communicates with. This server application can then use any third-party application or external dependency to communicate with whatever facilities, either locally or in the cloud. This also has the additional advantage that should a new version of the third-party application need to be installed, there is only one computer it will need to be installed on, keeping your local application clean and simple. So today we're going to be creating three applications: a client application, a server application, and a remote application. What we will do first of all is we will spin up our remote computer to which we are going to be connecting, Quad 4. What we have on screen now is the client application. We are setting one global variable up as a string to contain the name of the remote computer to which we will be connecting. And we're also setting up a port number as a constant, which will be the port number we are communicating to this remote computer with. Although we're using the console compiler in this program, there's no reason why we couldn't use the Windows compiler. The principle is exactly the same. So, having set our global variable up for the computer we're going to be connecting to, and titled the console window, set its color, the location on screen, and the height and width. The next thing we want to do is to actually send a message to our UDP server. So we're going to create a standard function which we can use to actually query our UDP server. We'll call this function query UDP server. We will send a string to that server and we will wait for a reply. The reply being populated into our str result variable, which we will display on the console. So we will create this function with its single parameter and some local variables. So having created our variables, the first thing we need to do is to capture the IP address of the computer we are currently on. Thankfully, PowerBasic makes this very easy using the host address command, which saves the IP address into a long variable. We also need to capture the host address of the computer we're going to be communicating with, UDP server. And we use exactly the same command, and we will save this to the BIP variable. Now we've captured both of those, we'll want to open a channel. We're using the free file command to get the next available handle. We can then use the UDP open command. This is opening a channel and setting a timeout value. And we're using the handle we've just got back from the free file function. If for any reason this did not work, we can then trap the error and exit the function. Now we want to build up a string buffer which we're going to send to our UDP server. To allow the UDP server to know that the command we're sending is actually for it, we will prefix the command with the name of the server, then a pipe delimiter, and then the string we want the server to do something with. And just so we can see what's happening, we will print that message out to the console. Now the IP address of the computer we're actually sending to is basically one big number. And in order to be able to see it easily on screen, I'm going to use a macro to turn that number into a IP address that is human readable. And this macro is .ip. It takes the long number coming in and it uses the using $command to chop it up into bits so you can actually see a standard IP address with 4 elements. So having got our string ready, the next thing we want to do is to create a do loop. And we're then going to use the UDP send command to send our buffer off to the remote server. Using the handle we've got back from the free file and the BP IP address, which is the IP address of the server, the port number we're going to be using, and the string we're going to be sending. Next, we want to monitor replies for the next 5 seconds. And within this while loop, we will first of all clear any outstanding errors using the error clear command. And we're going to use the UDP receive command on our file handle to pick up the IP address of the sender, the port the sender is actually using, and the buffer it's giving us back. So if that times out, we will basically just do an iterate. And if we do actually get something back, then we want to pick up the value that's come back from that server and we'll return that in our function. And having got that, we know our job is complete, and we will close down the file handle and exit the function. Now, just to ensure we don't end up in an infinite loop, what I'll do down here is increment the X counter, and we'll do a while X is less than 1, so it goes around that loop once. We can always increase that later on. And if in doubt at the end, just to make sure, we'll ensure by the time we actually leave this function that the file handle to the UDP server is actually closed down. So that should be our query server command complete. Let's just do a quick compile to make sure we haven't missed anything, which we haven't. So what we're doing in here is when the application actually runs, it's going to run this function, sending the word list to the server at the far end. So let's have a look at the server code. What's it going to contain? This is the application which will be the code sitting on the server. We're using a global variable to pick up the name of the server itself and a standard function to return the name of the computer, just using the environ $command. And in our PB main function, this is where we populate this global variable for the computer name. Although we're using the console compiler here, this code with a few minor changes can be used within the Windows compiler. And as we did in the previous program, we're picking up the host address of this computer and putting it into the IP variable. We're picking up a handle of the next free file. We're doing an open port, using a timeout in this case of 60 seconds. And printing a message to the console to say we're listening for broadcasts to our IP address. We then have a standard function that's going to process all incoming requests. If the incoming request happens to be exit, we will exit our loop, and this will terminate the program. Otherwise, we will make sure our console colors are exactly the same, its location on screen. We will clear the screen and set the caption to be the name of the computer and the title. So this standard function is going to process our requests. If we have a look at that, we'll see that it's doing something remarkably similar. It's taking the str request as a variable, and it's doing a UDP receive to pull back the information and put it into the str buffer variable. If the buffer is blank, then we exit the function, and we're testing the first element of the buffer based on the delimiter of the pipe. As you'll remember, we had set the first part of the string that's coming in to be the name of the UDP server. So if it doesn't match what this one is, it will ignore it completely. This will allow you to run several servers on different machines. And if we do receive it, we're printing a message out to say we've received it and what the string actually is. If the incoming string doesn't match the name of the server we're on, then we will send a message back using UDP send to whoever sent us the message to say we're not accepting this and we're exiting the function. Otherwise, we're picking up using the parse command the second part of the message, which is the string telling us what it wants to do, and we're going to go into a case statement. And in the case statement, we're sending back accepted, followed by a string, which in this case is going to give us a list back. So if we compile this program first of all, and we'll get this set up on the remote server. So here is our server application, and this is our remote computer, Quad 4. So if we copy this onto Quad 4, and if we open up a window on Quad 4, what we're going to do is we're going to run the application on that remote computer. And that's it running. It's now sitting waiting, listening for any broadcasts to its IP address. And it will sit there at the moment indefinitely. So if we have a look at our client application, and we'll just try compiling that to make sure it's okay. We try running that program now, we will see we have actually sent a message to the Quad 4 machine with the parameter list. The server has returned accepted, and it's given us a list back of 3 things: apples, oranges and pears. And the remote server is still running quite happily, so we could run this executable as many times as we like. And it would continue to return the information we've asked it to. Now the other command I've built into the server already is the command to do an exit. If this is the case, it will quite happily exit the application. So let's try that. We'll make a second call to our query UDP server with the word exit. So this should run, get our list, and then exit quite happily. As you will see on the remote machine, it's received the exit and it's now terminated the application. So we've effectively remote controlled an application on another computer. So while we've actually used the remote application to return information, we haven't actually used the remote application to run any third-party applications, and that's what we're going to do next. We will create a very simple remote application, which is only going to launch, sleep, and then exit. So if we ran this application on this machine, it would come up running remotely, then completed, and then terminate. So we're going to copy that application onto the remote one. So there's a remote application. We'll move that onto the remote box. So it's now on Quad 4. So as we'll see, all we've got running on Quad 4 is our UDP server. So let's change the client application to run something remotely. So we comment our exit code for the moment and paste in our new one. So it's going to use a run command, and we're telling it which application we want to run, in this case the cc remote app.exe. So we have a look at our server code just to see how this is going to execute. What I've done in the case statement is to have a case else, and then if the parsing of the request coming in has run, then we're going to pick up the application to run from the third parameter. In this case, our third parameter is going to be this, because the first parameter is the name of the UDP server, second parameter is the function we want to do, and the third parameter is going to be the name of the executable. Or indeed could be the path to the executable. So having determined the application to run, we're using the shell command in a function to execute that application. Since we're running in a function, the code continues immediately on to the next line, where we use a UDP send command to send a message back to the original application to tell us we have now started running our remote application. And also pulls back the PID number. And then the UDP server would continue on waiting for new requests. So if we try running that now, we'll see there is a remote application running quite happily. And it's now finished. So we have selectively launched an application remotely on the farm machine. Now this is a very straightforward UDP client-server application doing something very simple. However, using this technique, you can use a client to request something to be run remotely on another computer. And the user running your client application does not necessarily need to know that there is something running remotely performing the task they need to do. This could mean that a third-party application could indeed be installed only on the remote computer. If this UDP server is going to do many complex things, you're probably best starting to think about multi-threading. But that's probably a subject for a later video. That's it for today. Thank you for watching.